Je suis très heureux d'être ici ce matin.
I'm very happy to be here this morning with the American Secretary of Domestic Security. Ms. Napolitano and I had agreed in March to meet at least twice per year in order to find ways to better manage the border by targeting sectors that require intensified cooperation.
To ensure that we find ways to better manage our shared border. This high-level meeting mechanism is something that never happened before, and I think it's something that's turning out to be very positive for both our countries. Yesterday, we concluded an agreement on integrated cross-border maritime law enforcement operations, commonly referred to as ShipRider. ShipRider will allow both countries to police our shared maritime border together. By joining together with the United States, we will be better positioned to crack down on crime taking place in our shared waterways, like the smuggling of illegal drugs, tobacco contraband, and guns. And no longer will criminals be able to rely on an imaginary legal line in the water to escape the long arm of law enforcement. ShipRider has already been tested by our officials. Operations ran on a pilot basis, and the results were very encouraging. In just 57 days in 2007's pilot, Canadian and U.S. officers were able to successfully crack down on cross-border crime, seizing over 1.4 million contraband cigarettes, 215 pounds of marijuana, among many other successes they achieved. This initiative demonstrates important principles at work upon which we have agreed. Firstly, it's possible to enhance security at the border without impeding the legitimate flow of goods and people. And those who view security and trade as a mutually exclusive trade-off are simply wrong. And secondly, by competing and sharing resources, we can become both more efficient and more effective in achieving our objectives. Nous avons convenu de mettre au point.
We have agreed to use means to transmit personal information and information dealing with the security between our two countries. And also, we have agreed to integrate police operations at the border. The ShipRider project is a very good example of such an initiative.
And risk assessment for our mutual border. As this work proceeds, we will be able to develop a common understanding of the threats and risks that we face at the border and find ways to address these. It will build trust. It will strengthen our cooperation. It will strengthen enforcement, and it will allow us to deploy our resources more effectively. The advocates of trade and the advocates of greater security in both our countries have been calling for such a joint threat and risk assessment for some time. Our countries are now finally going to be undertaking that. Today we signed another agreement, the Emergency Management Framework. It facilitates direct communications between our governments on border operations during and after an emergency. It ensures that fire services and ambulances, vital goods and people will not be delayed at a border when emergency assistance is needed on the other side. If the border is closed for whatever reason, it will return to normal operation as quickly as possible. This agreement is again proof of our improving relationship in allowing us to develop practical, flexible approaches to solving some of the issues we face at the border. And again, this is something that allows us to enhance security by actually improving the flow of people and goods across our border. Again, this demonstrates that those who think there is a mutually exclusive trade-off between security and trade are simply wrong. Finally, we've agreed on a joint declaration which will guide our future decisions and the aim of strengthening border cooperation. We've agreed to explore models for joint or shared border facilities, equipment and technology, as well as for cross-designation of personnel when appropriate. Now, many of you know that the land and sea component of the Western Hemisphere Travel Initiative will kick in on June 1st, in just a few days. It will require that travelers have a valid passport or another compliant document in order to cross that American border. That's part of the Americans' approach to strengthening security. Also on June 1st, we are proceeding further with some of our efforts to strengthen and secure our border. On that date, the Cornwall border crossing will be added to the more than 50 that are already in place with armed border services officers. This is something that's good news for Canadians and continues to not only fulfill a commitment that we made to Canadians in previous campaigns, but also ensure that we can have our borders safe and secure for the interests of Canadians. Now, the agreements that we signed yesterday, that we met on and arrived at today, build on the close cooperation and friendship between our countries. They signal the beginning of a new era of cooperation, an era in which resources are maximized, cooperation increased, border security enhanced, and it's an era in which trade will flourish. Je suis fier de ce que nous avons.
I am proud of what we have accomplished during the last 2 days, even though I know that there are many things yet to be done.
Thank you. Thank you, Minister Van Loan, and I am very pleased to be here in Canada with the good friends here to conclude a very productive 2 days of meetings when we have been exploring a number of ways in which our two countries working together can increase the security of all of our residents on both sides of the border. Today, as Minister Van Loan just announced, we have initialed a framework on emergency management protocols for incidents along our border. This is just one of the many collaborations the Department of Homeland Security is undertaking with Public Safety Canada. We also signed the shipwriter agreement yesterday. That, of course, makes permanent what we discovered in a pilot, which is that kind of cross-designation aboard seagoing vessels and waterway vessels is a very good technique in order to deter lawbreakers from taking advantage of the border and trying to exploit the border for their own ends. We have in these protocols for emergency management, by way of example, bolstered communication between emergency departments on measures necessary to respond to, recover from an emergency, established coordination for the movement of goods and people across the border during a period of emergency, committed to develop joint messages for critical infrastructure sectors, health officials, trade, and the general public about the extent of an emergency, and again, have agreed that this is a place where we can take steps to furthering the joint cooperation between Canada and the United States where the safety and security of our peoples are concerned. I look forward to working over the next months and years as we continue to meet to flesh out the agendas that we have set for ourselves. We share a common interest. The common interest is safety and security, and recognizing the close friendship that Canada and the United States have always had and will continue to have. Thank you very much.